Hi everybody, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, interviews with the living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. Today we have a guest named Jenn Johnson. She goes by Nurse Jenn, and she's a registered nurse in Ontario, Canada, and she's worked in emergency rooms all over the area. She has a passion for helping those recent nursing graduates to grow into the nurses they dream to be, while avoiding the common pitfalls along the way. She's always happy to help healthcare workers looking for wellness resources, and she even wrote a book about her career. There will be a link to find the book, not only in the email that you're going to get, but also if you're just a listener on the notes that's attached to this episode. So we strongly encourage you to please check that out and support our guest. And with no further delays, here is Jenn. Jenn, how's it going?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Speaking of getting to know each other, I do always ask one question at the beginning of the episode, which is, how old are you, where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
Yeah, so I'm 39. I grew up in Cambridge, Ontario, and I classify myself as an elder millennial.
Awesome. And is Cambridge, Ontario, like, where is that in the vicinity of Toronto?
About an hour.
Okay.
So it's, I think, west of Toronto.
Okay, cool. I went to college in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so I went to Toronto about 6 times and always had a great time, despite the weather.
Nice.
Yeah.
So. Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Let's see. And do you have a lot of experience like interacting with registered nurses and nurses in the United States? And do you feel like there's any difference and I'm asking this for the purpose of this interview, or is it kind of safe to assume that the North American attitude and approach is pretty similar?
I'm going to say it's pretty similar. The only thing that would really change is just the lab values. We are in the metric system. You guys are imperial. So the lab values are a little bit different. But other than that, nursing is nursing no matter where you go. Got
it. Yeah, cool. That's very helpful for me to know. And have you always done emergency room work, or did you start your career in other situations?
Yeah, so I've always been in the ER. I kind of fell face first into it. My first job was a very, very rural hospital where there was one registered nurse for the ER, one registered nurse for the, oh my gosh, so sorry. These kids, okay. I can't even. Oh my God, the kids. Everything's cooked up.
Are you talking about your own children?
Sorry?
Are you talking about your own children?
Oh yeah, my kids, everything's interconnected. So it's like their friends call their iPad, which then links to my phone. And I'm just like, that's enough, guys.
That's cool. And if you're okay with it, I'm going to keep this in the podcast because I actually love when like parenting moments happen. As we discussed, I am also a father with young children.
Absolutely. Because it's the funniest thing, because no matter what, and they keep calling because it's linking to my phone. So it's just constant, Neva's calling, or this one's calling, or, somebody is trying to reach my kids, and you're just like, this is my phone. Nobody ever calls my phone. Can we not do this?
How old are your children?
So I've got almost 9 and 10.5-year-olds. So They are almost independent and running around like maniacs, and the usual where it's, they get home from school and they're running around. They're like, I'm hungry. And they're just like raiding the fridge, and it's just complete pandemonium.
I have
as per the usual.
I have 3 questions just that I want to go off on a tangent with, but they're all related to your career and having children. So the first question is,
absolutely.
How is it? I know like I did hospice, and I know I've had my own personal situations that test this, but is it like harder once you had kids to be in an ER when a child comes in? Like, did it ever change that part of your career?
I actually, after we had kids, I went to work specifically in a pediatric ER because I thought that was going to be my dream job.
Wow.
The mix of emergency medicine plus critically ill children. Thankfully, unthankfully, it was exceedingly well children that were routinely coming into the ER, and these poor parents were trying to, kind of peel them off the ceiling to say, no, everything's fine. They've got a fever because they're teething. That's okay. and trying to wean everybody off the ceiling. And the cases where the children were really, really unwell, again, thankfully, unthankfully, was actually very few and far between. Wow. So I don't think it affected me. I know it does affect a lot of people. That pediatric emerge is exceedingly young nurse-wise, just because people find it very, very hard. Mm-hmm. That once you do have your own kids, you can't turn off that, is it like my kid? Is it not like my kid? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's hard though, because there's my first pediatric death. I it was the exact same age as my daughter, and I wasn't even supposed to have been working that night, and it, you know, it was, at the time it was being ruled a homicide, and it was a hard go that way. But, you know, I came home and there were theoretical blankets in the mix that might have been cause of death. And so I came into my 2-year-old's bed and I took out all the blankets and I picked her up and we cried and all this kind of thing at like 3 a.m.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I was just very lucky that we were only 7-8 minutes from home was the drive. So there are the few, and usually it's just a matter of those who are, you know, closest in age. They kind of look like your kids, you know, you can empathize with what's happened. So sometimes it's hard that way, but it's really satisfying to like calm the parents down, and then the kid calms down, and then the parents calm down because the kids calm down, and then the kid calms down because the parents calm down. And then you finally get to a point where you're like, okay, everybody, why are we here? And it's like, you know, and then kind of get ramped up again. You're like, okay, you know, here's a sticker, and you blow up a glove and you draw a little happy face on it. And you're like, okay, here you go. And the kid's like super stoked that they're getting a balloon at the ER. Yeah. And then they're acting themselves, and the parents are going like, oh, well, they've been sleeping all day. And you're like, yeah, if they're unwell, they tend to sleep a lot. You know, take those wins when you can get them.
That's so cool, and it's so relatable. I'm curious, because your children are home and because you were talking about like social media and like the calls and stuff like that. I'm going to just ask both questions at once because I have a feeling they're tied into each other. Do you have concerns about children and the usage of like screens, and then do you have concerns with children and the usage of social media, and are those different, one and the same, and do you have a plan for how you're dealing with both?
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks.
Yeah, so my kids and screens, it's a love-hate relationship because they were 4 and 5 when the pandemic started, and they're already in like junior kindergarten. They were online, quote unquote, for school for, you know, a little bit here and there over the first 2 years of the pandemic. So thankfully, we already had iPads for them. Do I hate them? Absolutely. You know, your kids get totally entwined and you're having to like talk at them 2, 3, 4, 5 times to even get them to lift their head up. And then the social media and Minecraft, you know, the games out there. I actually was just at a conference where one of the nurses is she works with an organization that's representing people who are trying to stop human trafficking, and the amount of information she had on Roblox and Fortnite and, you know, all these other game places where the kids chit chat and talk, it's horrific and it's horrifying, and I'm scared to death for my kids because, you know, it's everywhere and it's prolific, and it's, you know, the questions about, well, when do you give your kids a phone and when do you not give them a phone, and what do you do? It's such a minefield because everybody is so different. And then the first person in their class to have an iPhone, it's a phone, it's a downhill battle from there. Yeah. So we're hoping that the parents kind of band together to be like, hey, they're 9 and 10. They don't need iPhones or phones to, you know, be kept track of, because, you know, the school's 6-7 blocks away. It's not bad. I've gotten to the point of letting them walk on their own. If they go together, they can do bikes if they do biking together. Like, at least there's the two of them and they're pretty close in age that they can go together. But it's a constant fear about, you know, where's my kid at and how do you manage letting them go and being independent and not freaking them out too badly, but then also being very mindful of the world around us.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that was just like, I tracked so well with you. I should have mentioned at the beginning, I'm 43 and you're 39 and my wife's 41. So like, I feel like it's more important to ask people my own age this than anyone else, because like you and I lived without this stuff. We lived with it, but we were old enough. We did. Yeah. So it's just like a real, like, it's weird. Like, I thought my biggest goal in life when I was 20 and I'm thinking about having kids would be like, don't get get your kids not to try cigarettes, you know? And now I'm like, oh, I would probably almost be happier if I found out they were smoking cigarettes than if they had a secret TikTok account and were talking to like creepy 25-year-olds and stuff, you know?
Oh, yeah. So I ended up, I do have a YouTube account only. I think there was one platform, I think it was LinkedIn, that wanted like a video of you just kind of explaining yourself, and that you would kind of get your LinkedIn profile, you know, a little bit more active kind of thing. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So I had to create this YouTube channel. Well, then my daughter found it and she's like, oh, I'm going to create YouTube videos. And kid you not, I was like, okay, you can do it. But your friends, if their friends are in the videos, they have to have parental permission. This is a non-negotiable. You have to run it by the parents.
Uh-huh.
And then absolutely no faces. And so she was actually able to find a filter that blurred out their entire bodies, which is great. But you could still tell that they were young girls dancing.
Yeah.
And within 2 days, they had 10 followers.
Oh, God.
For very cute little goofy videos. And I'm like, yeah, that's a hard no. That's an absolute. I am so freaked out. So freaked out.
I mean,
who's liking those videos?
Yeah.
There's like 6 videos of them in 2 days and 10 followers. Like, really? Like, this is just creeping me right out. So I was not happy with that at all. So we kind of tried to kibosh that as best we could.
Awesome. Well, thank you. You give excellent answers. You stay on track, and I love this interview. So I'm going to shift now to the purpose of the interview, but don't get me wrong. That was incredibly important to all of my interests.
No worries.
So I think actually this is a great time to ask you what your philosophy on death is, because you've already brought up working in the children's, the pediatric rather, emergency room, and then we've also just brought up death in general. So I think before I start asking you the air quotes tough questions about ER work and death, let's find out what you actually think happens when you die. So I'd love to know, one, what you think happens when you die, and two, if that has changed at all in your life.
Yeah, so I'm pagan. And so for me, you know, it's all about spirituality and helping the spirit, and spirit lives around us, and, you know, loved ones are always here. So it makes life a little bit easier when dealing with death at work and actually dealing with death, you know, in our own families kind of thing, where you're thinking, well, they're not really, we feel like they're not really gone. They're still kind of hanging around, and they're there if you want to ask them questions or talk to them and that kind of thing. That's changed. I was raised United, oh my gosh, Christian. And, you know, wasn't a huge player in my childhood, but my dad was fairly religious growing up. But it's kind of fallen to the wayside, and I, you know, married a Roman Catholic who doesn't practice. So it's kind of, you know, and he used to be a paramedic, so he absolutely gets, you know, the death and dying work that we do. And, you know, it's just one of those things where now talking to patients and talking to their families and getting them to think that, no, death, we can talk about death. Like, that's an absolutely fine topic. And I'm glad you want to talk about it and that you're open enough and that you're mentally prepared enough for this to be a possibility, because it's a guaranteed. And so trying to talk to family members is always interesting, especially those who don't, you know, do everything you can and all this kind of stuff. And so when they ask me, you know, what do you think? It's, well, you know, they're here right in this instant. Even if they're unconscious, we still believe that they can hear you. So talk to them, say your goodbyes, say everything that you need to say. And granted, you know, it's more than likely for the families than for the patient, but it's just another way to start the coping, because a lot of what I deal with in a day is helping others to cope. And it has nothing to do with medical issues. It's all about social issues and spiritual issues and coming at it from that angle.
Wow. I don't even know how to ask this like appropriately, but are you ever the person who has to come and tell a family, I'm sorry, like the person you brought here is deceased, or is that always someone else's job, or how does that work?
It depends. So if I've really had a really good connection with family, you know, they've been there a couple of days, because it does take several days sometimes to get a bed on the medical floor and your person's been admitted. You know, I'm very, very quick to have the conversation of like, hey, so, you know, is everybody okay with grandma's wishes? Because it says in the chart that she has a do not resuscitate order. So that means we're not doing anything. Because every now and again, there's that family member that pops up out of nowhere that says, oh my God, do everything you can. You're like, no, please no. Like, this is not going to work. If anything, I'm going to be inflicting horrific traumatic damage, not just physically, but emotionally on the family as they watch me try to resuscitate their loved one, knowing very well that it's super futile. You know, they're 90, they're full of cancer. They've got fractures already. They've been very unwell for weeks already. Like they're wasting away kind of thing. And then they come into the ER and it's just usually that one person that pipes up that, oh my God, no, do everything. And you're like, okay, like, let's take a step back and let's talk about this, because I don't think you actually know what CPR actually entails. Mm-hmm. You know, if I'm doing my job right, I am breaking ribs.
Yeah.
And not just one, I'm breaking all of them. So, you know, I'll pull up a video of CPR. Again, it's all about how you feel about the family. You know, how much reserve do they have to actually take this in right now? Mm-hmm. If they're already way far gone, they're super caught up in their grief and their you know, their behavioral and all these things, you know, you're not going to get anywhere with trying to talk to them. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much just give them some space, let them try and see if they can calm down and get to a spot where they may have a little bit of mental bandwidth to be able to have a talk about, this is what this actually entails. And no matter what we do, the chances of survival are nil to nothing. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't you rather, you know, get into the bed with grandma, you know, cuddle up to her, and we'll play some, you know, whenever grandma was 20, find that decade, grab the iPhone Spotify list, play, you know, the best number one hits from that decade or that year.
That's sweet.
And do that. Enjoy that. Let me give her pain medications. You know, this is the way I would want to go out.
Yeah.
Is just, you know, high as all hell and pain free and not really know what's going on, because yeah, it's scary and we're not sure what happens next, but the dying process is exceedingly painful. So why not provide that comfort? And then when family sees that the patient's comfortable and not struggling and not having respiratory issues, then they calm down. And then they're finally in a place like, okay, let's talk about this while we've got some time. I'm also the one to very quickly come to the DNR conversations because I don't want to be cracking on anybody's chest if I don't have to. So if grandma's coming in and she's still with it, and maybe we don't have a code status on the chart, I'll ask people, even as they're on the EMS stretcher, like they've barely made it through the door. I'm like, hey, so if your heart were to stop, you know, would you want us to do everything? Would you want the tube down your throat? Would you want the chest compressions, all that? And I swear, 50 to 60% of the time, these people, they have made up their minds. Oh, no, dear, don't do that. You know, I don't want any of that done.
Yeah.
And you're like, perfect. So when family does come in and heaven forbid something happens, I can then tell the family, hey, I've already had a conversation with her. And in her own words, she wants none of it. Mm-hmm, and so if I can help, you know, protect that patient's wishes as well as protect their physical body from any unnecessary trauma, I'm going to do that.
That's really cool, because that's a lot of crossover to when I did hospice, and especially the part about playing music from like when they were in their 20s. And it's funny because I can actually see myself in a state like that, loving songs from when I was 20 that I actually hated, you know, just because nostalgia. I'm going
to bop like crazy to them.
That's cool.
We did this for my grandmother. So she was 96 and, you know, in and out of hospital. And now she's, you know, not really all that responsive. She has, you know, she had small lucid periods, but not really. And so the one time that we had gone to visit her, I crawled in the bed and my mother's going like, oh my God, you can't get in the bed. I'm like, who says? I'm like, Mom, like when was the last time anybody touched her other than to roll her or clean her or do something? I'm like, when was the last time she got a hug? Nobody knows. So I'm going to crawl in here. They can roll their eyes all they want if they want to. They can try and talk to me, but it's going to go nowhere. And so I put on Frank Sinatra, and she started to like tap her toes while she was kind of unconscious. I'm like, oh my God. And my mother's like, I would have never thought to do that. That's perfect because this is so nice. Mm-hmm. The only thing we laugh about now, it was Frank Sinatra's My Way. And if you know the lyrics to My Way, it starts off, and now the end is near.
Yeah.
The time for the final curtain, and I'm like looking at my grandmother, and I'm like trying not to look at my mom, and I'm like, oh my God, please do not let her hear these lyrics right now. We laugh about it now because grandma was kind of a prankster.
Yeah.
But in the moment, you're like, oh, I don't know how mom's gonna handle this.
Wow. It's so interesting. I would be reticent if I didn't bring up the fact that you're an author and talk a little bit about your book. I'm sure you've been on enough shows by now, and I'm an author and I've been on shows to know that none of us have time to read your book, and we can't. So it's always a little awkward.
That's fine.
But luckily for once, your book is not really written for me because I don't have a career in nursing, but it is very intriguing actually, because my favorite topic in the whole world is intuition. So I was totally struck by your book, Nursing Intuition.
Come on.
So what I'm saying is I actually want to read it. I'm hyping you, but I do want to ask you, it's like a weird question because, I don't know what the source of intuition is at all. I just know that ever since I started listening to it, my life is 55 million and a half times better than it was, and it continues to improve. And anytime I don't listen to it, it gets 75 million times worse in within a second. So I'm now obsessed with intuition. But what I'm curious about is if you're pagan and your philosophy is like, this is it, and we're here, and then we go, I'm just curious, where do you think the source of intuition comes from?
I think it's a mix. So experience mixed with maybe some knowledge that you've picked up or overheard or didn't realize that you consciously took in. Also then mixed with, your gut feelings. And it's the same idea as any woman who is greater than 12. You know exactly what intuition feels like because you'll walk into a party and you'll meet somebody, you're like, ugh. Absolutely not.
Totally.
Everybody is ranting and raving about this person, and I am nonplussed. This is not going anywhere. So I'll be pleasant, but I'm not going to have anything to do with you.
Yeah.
Like we know that feeling, and then to take it and bring it into nursing, it's something that we're already doing. And oh my goodness. And of course my children are literally climbing all over me. This is the way this goes. I miss you too, guys.
Aww.
And they're like sticking their tongue in my ear.
It's just, I'm not going to lie. I'm so happy that they don't outgrow the phases. I thought they outgrew all this by 5 or 6, and not because of evidence. I just was dumb. So I'm so happy. I want my kids cuddling with me as long as possible.
If you let them cuddle, they will cuddle.
Aww.
That's 100% a thing. And so, oh my gosh, trying to get back to intuition, guys.
I hope you don't mind. I'm planning on leaving this in because I actually think this is heartwarming and lovely. So
please do, because they're such goofballs, and I love them to pieces. And I know that I've been away twice now in the last month and a bit because of conferences, which is new for them and new for me. Mm-hmm. And so they're kind of having a bird that I've been away and they haven't been able to bother me as much as they want to. But that's just, it's the author gig. It's trying to get the things off the ground and the businesses going and all that. So,
and actually, speaking of that, just real quick, because I think it's very relevant too. What I think I know the answer because you have a huge heart and you're just a good person. But I'm curious, what ultimately compelled you to sit down, write a book, and then let alone publish it and go on a circuit? What was the final thing that nudged you in that direction?
Yeah, COVID burnout.
Wow.
Working COVID. The kids were 4 and 5 when everything first started, and then daycare shut down, so we didn't have any access to daycare. So my husband was also essential, so he worked Monday to Friday, 8 to 4 in infection control, no less. And I worked straight night. So I would stay up all night. I would work all night and then stay up all day with the kids, and then work all night and then stay up all day with the kids. And so 4 on, 5 off. And I was a basket case. I should have been nursing. I needed to not exist. My parents were very, very scared about, everything when it first started. So, and they were the people who, my mother was washing boxes and leaving things out in the garage for a day to make sure that nothing came in with it. And so there wasn't a lot of support. And so burning out so hard, had no idea how much sleep played a role in burnout and resilience and being able to cope. That was a huge learning curve. And so finally getting to a point of, how do you, if I were to die, and that was, we had attorneys offering to do our wills for free at the very beginning. So, you kind of felt like, well, I'm not expected to survive. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So we did what we just needed to do. And then it got to the point, well, if I were to die, how do I explain to a 4- and 5-year-old that mom chose to continue to go into work?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you explain that to kids, or kids growing up and then turning into teenagers and all of the emotions that come with that kind of loss? So I started writing down my really good stories, and then of course, the really bad stories very quickly soon flowed after. And they poured out of me. Oh my gosh, Elise. they poured out of me. She like knocked the phone.
There's like no irony to any of this. It's like the least ironic thing ever, and I love it. It's so fitting.
Well, and they've heard this spiel before, right? So
so therefore,
we do talk about a little bit of death and dying, and it's not a super taboo topic. But here's a 9-year-old like just listening to this whole conversation.
This is great. I love this.
You're almost 9, baby. You're almost 9.
Oh my
and
God.
So writing everything down and figuring it out, and having to go back and forth a couple of times, because a lot of these stories were the 2-minute little blurbs that we tell to each other as nursing professionals when we've got a minute. And it wasn't until listening to Llewellyn, who's a publisher in the United States, who was having online book fairs, and the one author, her book was Intuition at Work. And I'm like, intuition at work? I use intuition all the time at work. And it was just this click. And I'm like, so I went back and I looked through all my stories. I'm like, here's this thread of intuition that has woven itself all the way through all of these stories, whether I listened to it, whether I didn't listen to it, but it played a part in every single story. And I'm like, okay, well, I would love to put this out there. I would love to, bare my traumatic soul to the world, but without science to support it, like, I'm not willing to go there. August of 2020 and all the misinformation, disinformation is really starting to kick up. And I'm like, I'm not putting myself out there unless there's science. And so went into this spiral of a deep dive into intuition and science and peer-reviewed articles. And so there's not only so much information on intuition, but specifically intuition in nursing. And I'm going, oh my God, there's science. Like, we talk about this all the time. It's a 3 a.m. conversation, and it's a, quote unquote woo-woo topic. And we don't think about things, but we have this way of talking about, how our gut feelings affect us. But we all talk about it in very different ways, and how we relay that information to the doctors is also a whole other ball game. You'll go up to your docs, and hopefully it's one of your regulars who's been working there forever and day, and you say, hey, I don't know about the woman in room 2, like, something's just not right. Like, I just don't know what's going on. If you could see her next, I would really appreciate that, because I'm kind of concerned. And it's that way of saying, I don't know, but in reality, my gut is screaming at me that something's up, and I can only do so much before the doctor sees them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how that all kind of wove in together. And the more I talk about it now at work, the more other people are finally opening up and talking about their experiences and their own intuitions and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, this is obviously what has to happen. If I've got to be the lamb that gets put on the spit in order for this conversation to start happening, I will do it. That's fine by me. Let's get this going. And, it was so cathartic to be able to write these stories down. And actually, my first patient death, which happened while I was a student, I'm still in contact with the family, 16, 17 years later. And I sent them the story, and I had changed some details, obviously, to try and keep some anonymity, even though it's been 17 years. Mm-hmm. And the husband goes, oh my God, he goes, this is bang on. I love this, use it and put her name in it, and, change all the things that weren't right and all these kind of things. And I'm like, I would love to put her name on it, but I still don't feel comfortable enough to do that, just for, it's been so wired into us that we protect the patient anonymity at all costs that mm-hmm. I'm reticent to do it. But to know that the patient's family is behind me. And not only have they just read her story, they've read the whole book and 100% approve. That's everything.
That's so cool. Nurse Jenn Johnson, author of Nursing Intuition, How to Trust Your Gut, Save Your Sanity, and Survive Your Career ebook. You have been an amazing guest. You have amazing children. You have amazing energy. I am a hippie. I really believe in energy and intuition. It has become more predominant
Absolutely.
in my life. And I also believe so much in intuition and you that I bought your book while we were talking, even though I told you I wouldn't be surfing on the internet. I actually sneakily went ahead and bought it. So you have at least one customer from this podcast experience. But for real, you're a compelling human, and I really like your story. And I'm looking forward to Bullies, Ghosts, Aha Moments, Intuition, and Death. I love what you, how you advertise your book, and also just who you are as a human. So thank you so much for coming on our show today.
Anytime, we'll happily come on anytime you need a spot filled.
Cool. Real quick, I'll just ask you one question.
Yeah.
It can only be funny. It's a weird question. What is the funniest freak accident you ever saw in the emergency room?
Oh my God, the funniest.
Or just like something that isn't super dark, you know?
Honestly, the most memorable was I was working a trauma center and somebody was being brought in. And so it was this 20-something-year-old guy still living at home, was a little bit mentally challenged. And unfortunately, his parents had bought him a crossbow for Christmas or a birthday or something. And he was playing with it in his room. And unfortunately, it fired into his neck. And he came in and he was already seen at a different hospital. He was transferred into ours and he was awake and talking with this like crossbow arrow sticking out of the middle of his neck. And it was just one of the coolest things I think I've ever seen. Just in regards to like, that really sucks, but I'm glad that he's well enough and like with it enough to be sitting up and talking.
That is so cool.
That was super, super cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to Coffin Talk. My name is Mike Oppenheim. This has been a great interview with Nurse Jennifer Johnson. Please follow the link, buy her book, Nursing Intuition. It's on Amazon. It's easy to find. And once again, the best way to support this show is to head over to MikeyOpp.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com and sign up for free to the once-a-week philosophy comedy newsletter that I write, which also advertises the podcast. Once again, my name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.